Hello and welcome to another episode of Heat Check. I am John Devine, and with me, as always, is Anthony Chang. We are filming this in between two games against the Brooklyn Nets. Oh boy, those are wonderful games, let me tell you. So at this point, we may as well talk about where the Heat stands, where they're trying to go, what they're trying to do, and I guess most importantly, what they're trying to avoid, which is yet another play-in. So talk to us. What can we really learn from last night's game? Well, like I said, this is from Wednesday. So from Tuesday's game, what can we learn?
The Brooklyn Nets are not good. They've lost, I think, 9 in a row now. 15 wins in the season. But look, the Heat have had trouble. They lost to the tanking Jazz early this season, right? They've had some bad losses. So it was an encouraging business-like performance from the Heat. I don't know if you can learn a lot. But it's encouraging. They basically led from start to finish. Never, took their foot off the pedal, led by double digits the entire second half. We've seen this Heat team have lulls in the middle of games, so that's good. But other than that, I mean, you take the win and you move on, and you hope to do it again on Thursday against the Nets and take advantage because, for the Heat to get out of this play-in tournament, they have to make up some ground, and they can't afford losing to the Nets, right? Especially when you have games on the horizon against Detroit, against Charlotte, against Houston. Like, you have some tough games coming up. You got to take advantage of this part of the schedule.
It's amazing that now we're seeing a key game against Charlotte, which shows you how quickly their fortunes change.
Yeah.
And if we remember, since we last spoke, they actually beat Houston, which was a mini surprise in itself. So it's not like they can't rise to the level of competition. Let's look at where they are in the standings. As of Wednesday, where are they in this whole play-in standings?
Yeah, they're right there. It's going to be a tight race. I mean, they're in 8th place in the East right now, basically percentage points behind Orlando. One loss behind Orlando, but percentage points in the standings. One loss behind Philadelphia, which is in 6th place. So they're right there. With 20 games left, that their goal of getting out of the play-in is definitely realistic. I mean, again, they're only one loss behind Philly for that last, a top 6 spot to avoid the play-in. Yeah, they're there, but the thing is, they don't have the tiebreaker against Orlando. Orlando's already won 4 of the first 5 matchups. They have that extra matchup because of the in-season tournament. And in Philly, the tiebreaker is still up in the air. That season series is 2-1. No, sorry, 1-1. It's split right now. So the winner of their matchup in Miami in March will determine who gets that head-to-head tiebreaker with Philly and Miami. So there's some stuff still to be determined, and there's some big games. And Eric Spoelstra has said, like, again, what he's supposed to say, but he has said multiple times already, he likes this pressure for this team, that, these are kind of must-win games here that they're facing down the stretch of the season. We've obviously had this conversation before the last 3 years where they're trying to get out of the play-in. They don't succeed in that. They end up in the play-in. But this year, you look at Basketball Reference, they have a playoff probabilities report that's updated daily. The Heat actually have the best chance to avoid the play-in of Orlando, among Orlando, Philly, and Miami. They have a 55.7% chance to get a top 6 spot. And that's a lot. All that's because they have an easy schedule coming up. But that's encouraging that the numbers say that he have the best chance of those 3 teams to avoid the play-in. So we'll see if that actually happens.
The numbers also probably said that they had a great chance of beating the Jazz that night, too.
Exactly.
And that did not happen.
Let me tell you, if they lose to the Nets on Thursday, those chances will probably go to like from 55% to probably like 20%, right? That's how much a loss like that would impact their chances of getting out of the play-in. And these things could swing from game to game just because one bad loss can make a big difference for the Heat. It could go, they can go from tied with Philly to 2 games back, just with one loss. And look, like we talk about Charlotte, we joke a little bit, but Charlotte is only 2 losses behind Miami right now. They're 9. They have a big game on Friday in Charlotte, or they can make even more ground on Miami and be 1 loss behind them. So we're talking about Miami moving up, but they have to. There's also a chance they can move down in the standings, right? With how well Charlotte's playing, and even Atlanta's only 2 games behind Miami. Atlanta's in 10th right now. So there's a lot still to be determined. You would think Miami would move up just because of the schedule they have in front of them, but there's some teams right on their heels, looking to pass them also.
You mean the revitalized Hawks led by the great Jonathan Kuminga? who couldn't get off the bench in Golden State.
Look,
that people talked about maybe coming here, but they weren't sure whether to invest a pick in him or.
he's looked good. He's looked good, and all these teams in this, it's like I talked to my fellow colleagues in the media about Heat chance of escaping the play-in, and Atlanta and Orlando. I don't trust any of these teams. They're in this spot for a reason, right? I don't trust any of them. They're very hot and cold. All these teams. It's probably going to come down to like a battle. Whoever has the worst loss, like ends up in the play-in, right? So I do think it's going to come down to the final days of the season. It's going to be nip and tuck. Or Miami still has a game against Philly left. Miami still has 2 games against Charlotte left. Miami still has 1 game against Orlando left. So those are huge games that will likely go a long way in determining where Miami ends up here. If they end up in the play-in for the 4th straight year, or if they can get one, the 6th spot.
And even the whole play-in scenario, because the Heat has perfected the art of getting into the play-in. You see one way, look, they're playing like it's a playoff series now, which sometimes has led them going into there being sharp going in, and they have surprised those higher seeds, those 1 seeds, and even won one of those series. Or they wear themselves out so much trying to get to that spot, going through the play-in, and then they get blasted like they did last year.
Right.
Looking at this team, what kind of scenario? Because, I know, Jimmy's not here anymore. So what kind of scenario do you see? Do you see a leader who can push them through if they make that play-in to say that we're just as deserving and it's 0-0 and we can work our way through? Or do you think they're going to look around like kids and look up and go, wow, we're in the playoffs, and get blasted like they did last year?
I mean, they have some experienced players on this roster, right? I mean, you have Bam, who's played in 2 NBA finals. He's been to the playoffs pretty much every year of his career almost. Tyler Hero, I know he's been injured for those finals runs, but he has some playoff experience. Norman Powell obviously has some playoff experience. He won a championship with Toronto. Like, you have some experienced guys here. I don't think they'll be like wide-eyed in that first round. The question is, do they have enough talent? Do they have that alpha that you need in the playoffs to win a playoff series? And that's the question that I don't want to say we don't know the answer to yet, because we've seen this for a long time already, and I think we know the answer, that they need an alpha. They're kind of missing that number 1. But you need that to win in the playoffs. And we've seen that against Cleveland last year, where they obviously got crushed. You would hope for better results this year, but there's nothing that we've seen over the last, over the first 5 months of the season that would say anything's different. They're still inconsistent. They're still kind of around 500. They're still struggling to beat good teams and kind of getting most of their wins against bad teams. So as much as I would like to, give hope to Heat fans, I do think this team is probably better than a play-in team. I think when healthy, they have enough talent to be a top 6 team in the East. They should. But to win a playoff series against, a Detroit or New York, I can't say that with confidence right now, just because, they haven't proven that they could do that yet without Jimmy Butler. They just haven't proven that.
Okay, Anthony, so I have a question for you. And the minute I ask it, I have a feeling I should update it. Is there any difference between the Heat and Cleveland going in? Last year's Heat and Cleveland team, except for the fact that they had Donovan Mitchell. Now, this year, obviously, you're dealing with adding James Harden. But we're talking about whether an alpha is important or not. What was the difference between those 2 teams outside the fact that they had an alpha? Now, I know one team had a bigger front line. I get Khalil Ware was a rookie. But overall talent level, was there really that big a difference where they had the biggest blowout and, in that kind of series?
Should it have been that lopsided? Probably not. But the biggest difference, like you said, was Donovan Mitchell. Right. I mean, you need an alpha like that, a superstar, to win in the playoffs. And you kind of saw him separate himself from everyone else in that series. And right now, that's what Heat are searching for, right? And could Bam lift himself into that eventually? This is his 9th season, and we've seen him at times do it in a game, a playoff game here, playoff game there. Usually it was Jimmy leading the way, but Bam stepped up when he needed to. But can he do it as a number 1? Without Jimmy, that's still to be decided. We haven't seen anything that we could say with confidence that he could do that. So to me, that's the biggest difference, because like you said, last year, Garland and Tyler kind of a wash. Bam and Evan Mobley, kind of a wash. I mean, Jared. The thing is, like you said, and you alluded to this. One of the biggest differences was Kalal and Bam were starting together in that series, and it was a struggle for them two together against Allen and Mobley, which is kind of like what the Heat want Bam and Kalal to eventually be. But Kalal was a rookie. Those two guys have a lot of experience together, and that was another big difference, just the experience there in that front line, going against a 21-year-old Kalal Ware.
Right. I'm saying at this point, Bam can't, and here's why. One, yes, he's 6'9", he brings the ball up the floor, but he's not ball dominant like those guys. And even if you want to use a big guy, you want to use like Giannis, they're not making the playoffs this year. But in their runs, when Giannis had the ball, Giannis got the ball from one end, he was going downhill straight down. That's not his game. So if you're going to have to get him the ball, then defenses, especially in a playoff series, defenses will be designed to take away what he likes to do. You remember when they were running screen-heavy games, it was, hey, let's have Bam with the ball, and then he'll either hand off or fake the handoff, and then make a decision from there. I don't see them making a living on that all the way through where Bam gets his. Even now, we're talking Donovan Mitchell. Okay, you have Donovan Mitchell. Now you also have James Harden. Both of those guys can be ball dominant. They can hog the ball all they want. They can pick and choose when they want to go off. You and I both know James Harden will take a heat check from 30, 35 feet in a heartbeat. And that's good. But for everything we say, we're still looking for James Harden's definitive playoff breakout series.
Sure.
He hasn't had one. He's had scoring titles. He's had 50-point games. But if you look at the playoffs and you go, and Donovan Mitchell has, to his point. Another guy we could talk about is Murray for Denver. He has gone off. He went off in the bubble. He was having 50-point games. There are certain guys who, even when it's playoff basketball and everyone's designing what they're going to do to stop you, can go get theirs. I don't think Bam can go get his. I think Tyler Hero has a mentality that he will shoot to go get his, but the jury is still out whether he can. Norman Powell may be able to go to get his, but he hasn't been in a playoff series as a lead player where everyone's saying, hey, you go get yours. We haven't seen that yet, so we don't know. We've seen him do it somewhat in the regular season, but at 32, he was a late bloomer. So we don't know. And I think that's still the difference. That led me to my second question, and it was the play-in versus not the play-in. So if you can tell us who's at 1-2, so if you make the play-in and and you qualify for the next round, versus who would be 3-4. So we always talk about avoid the play-in, but who are you going to play at 1-2?
Yeah,
would you play at 3-4? Because that would be who you would be if you were a 6 seed, right?
Yeah, it's honestly not that big a difference. I don't think. I think like the top three, especially, and now with Harden and Cleveland playing better, maybe you can even say the top four are kind of. There's not much of a difference, not much of a gap between those teams.
Okay,
so right now, Detroit seems like they're going to run away with the East as a number one seed. They're 4.5 games over the second place Celtics. So you think if you're end up an 8 out of the play-in like the Heat were last year, like they've been the last few years, they would face Detroit in that first round. And Detroit obviously has been the best team in the East in the regular season. I guess there's some questions of how that will translate right in the playoffs. But they do have a lot of talent, obviously, and they've had a lot of success so far this year. Boston is at 2. They have a 1.5 game lead on the Knicks, which is in the 3 spot. So if you're 7, you're either going to face Boston or New York, most likely, and then Cleveland is 4, 3 games behind the 2 spot. So it's going to be those 4 teams. Detroit's probably going to end up 1, probably Boston or New York number 2, and then if you're out of the play-in at 6. Facing Cleveland or New York or Boston, I guess. So it's still to be determined, but those are the 4 teams. And I honestly don't think like facing Detroit and facing the Knicks, I don't see much of a difference there, to be honest. Like as far as quality of opponent, I think they're both really good. And they're both
I don't want to have anything to do with Boston at this point.
Well, Boston, they get Tatum back. We don't know what Tatum's going to look like, right? But the buzz is that Tatum's going to be back very soon. They've already been playing well without him. You would think adding Tatum's only going to help them, but it's going to change the way they play, right? And we'll see how that works. But yeah, Boston, I mean, Heat have gone up to Boston many times for the playoff series. And they've had some good moments. They've had some bad moments. I mean, they faced them 2 years ago as the 8th seed when Jimmy got hurt in the play-in. They lost in 5 games. I honestly don't see much of a difference. To me, I think the Knicks are the best team in the East. That's always been my thought all season. But Detroit is obviously very good too, and Boston has proven that they could win without Tatum, and now they're going to Tatum back. So a lot of quality teams at the top.
Not only so winning without Tatum, an achievement in itself. I figured they would be just scraping in. Maybe they would be like a 5-6. Maybe
we thought they were at the Heat's level before the season. Yeah.
But then you're adding Tatum. The other thing is, what big man did they get at the trade deadline?
They got Vucevic.
Right. And for all this great stuff about Porzingis being this unicorn, his biggest problem was he wasn't always available. Vucevic, big body, huge body.
Can shoot.
Can shoot. The kind of guy who would give either Tatum either Bam or Khalil problems. And you're dealing with that, and then you're dealing with all these guys shooting threes. I think he is a big body who still hasn't won a title yet, who's hungry. And as big as he is, he looks like he's always hungry. But as big as he is, I think that's a problem because that's a mix of experience. That's a mix of a lot of talent. And you're right. They would have to reintegrate Tatum in because, Brown maybe used to being an alpha by himself now. Maybe he doesn't want to give that up. But when you mix that amount of talent in with that amount of experience, everybody else up there, Detroit doesn't have that requisite experience yet. So you don't know what's going to happen when you punch them in the mouth, right?
Yeah.
Cleveland's still trying to climb that hill. New York keeps bouncing people in and out. And, and no offense, but the pressure of being New York, you haven't won since the 70s. Now you haven't won a title since the 70s because, for all the Patrick Ewing years, people still say the Patrick Ewing years were somewhat of a disappointment because he didn't win a title. They don't care who was playing against. New York, it's like win or bust. So that's a totally different pressure cooker, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so as those playoffs ramp up, it's going to get crazy. So that's why Boston is the team that if I'm dealing with, hey, whether I'm going to be a 5 or 6 seed or a 7 and 8, if I could avoid them in the first round and let somebody else beat each other up, maybe you can catch something like that.
I just think you can make an argument for any of those 4 teams. Well, definitely top 3. And then Cleveland, maybe if they continue playing this way with Harden, depending on how they look, that they're all, I could see people saying, well, I think Detroit's the best team. I think New York's the best team. I think, it doesn't sound crazy, either of those arguments, right? They're all pretty much close on the same tier. There's not like an Oklahoma City in the East or San Antonio in the East that you're like, they're clear cut above the other, right? To me, the biggest advantage of avoiding the play-in would be, and I know the Heat have overcome this before, especially 2 years, when they made the finals out of the play-in, but just the rest disadvantage, right? You're playing either 1 or 2 games in the play-in tournament, then having to go straight and travel to Boston or travel to New York to start a first-round playoff series where the other team has been off for a week, right? That's a big disadvantage. So I think that's even the biggest motivating factor of avoiding the play-in is having that week to reset, get some practices in, get healthy. And I think this year's play-in tournament, I know this is like not saying much because it's a play-in tournament, but I think this year's play-in tournament is going to be the toughest one yet to get out of. Usually Chicago and Atlanta, like two other mediocre teams that they're kind of like just in this middling state, right? But this year you're going to have Charlotte, who's been one of the best teams in the league over the last 2 or 3 months, right?
I think they're 15-3 since like the end of January.
Yeah, so you have a really like a hot young Charlotte team that's going to be motivated, that hasn't, they want to make the playoffs. You have Orlando, who has beat Miami all 4 times this year, and they have talent with Banchero, and if Wagner gets healthy. And then you have Atlanta, who's, probably the one that you're like, if the Heat get them, they should beat them. But Milwaukee, I mean, they're 4 games back right now of 10, but now they just got Giannis back. Could they make a run? Atlanta goes on a slide, and all of a sudden you have to face Giannis in the play-in tournament. It could be a tough play-in tournament season for the Heat if they're in there.
If you're Milwaukee, though, do you really want to get in the playoffs this year with the draft the way it is?
No,
Do
I
you
don't.
really want to?
I don't. But I also think they're trying to impress Giannis. They want to keep him, right? And it's like they're trying to find this balance of like telling Giannis we're trying to win and we're trying to make the playoffs, but at the same time, like it's okay if we lose because then we can have a top pick. So it's a tough kind of balancing act right now.
I
But
don't know. A top 10 pick in a loaded draft. If you end up with what's his name, DeSanta, for example, and it's like, oh, okay, I've got him to run with you. Is that better than getting knocked out in the first round?
well, that's why
you don't have the bullets to.
We could tell the Heat that, right? And
yes, but
yeah,
I don't think Milwaukee is rooted in Bucks culture for a decade.
No, I know. That conversation is moot for the Heat, but it is right. Fans. There's Heat fans that would say, "I'd rather you lose the rest of your games and miss the playoffs and just get in the lottery and see what happens." Right? Like Dallas last year, they got Cooper Flag. That's not going to happen. The Heat are going to make the playoffs. The question at this point is, are they going to make the play-in or are they going to qualify directly for the playoffs? So, yeah.
So we've gone heavy into the playoff scenarios, and by the time we do our next video, we're going to be even closer to the finish line. But let's talk about end of season type awards. If there's one award we're talking about, it's probably Bam and either the first team all defensive team or whether he even gets any votes to be defensive player of the year. I know you put a story out today talking about his chances of it and why he doesn't think so. Tell us a little bit about that for those of you who don't feel like investing the time and money into actually opening that story. Don't give them too much. Make them go through the story, though.
I'm going to tease it. This has been an annual thing for Bam, right? Where he thinks he deserves more credit for his defense than he gets. And to me, he's received a lot of recognition for his work on the defensive end. I mean, he had 5 straight years of being on an all defensive team, 4 straight in the second team. And then 2 years ago, he got his first time on the first team all defense. But last year he didn't make it at all. Kind of was surprising. I thought he should have made at least a second team. This year, I think he's going to make all defense. He had the 4th best defense in the league. Usually, when you're the best defender on a top 5 defense, usually you make it. But yeah, I do think there is something to what he says of he doesn't average 4 or 5 blocks a game. That's not his style of defense, right? He doesn't average 4 steals a game like Dyson Daniels. He doesn't get the blocks that Wembanyama gets. But his defensive impact is felt, right? I mean, every year the Heat are a top 10 defense really because of him. This year, the top 5 defense. He's just so versatile. He can guard anybody on the court. He can play any scheme. He plays zone. He plays drop. He switches. Just the most versatile defender in the league. I think at some points, like that year, they had, I think, the 2nd or 3rd best defense. The year they were the number 1 seed in the East when they had Kyle Lowry, PJ Tucker. I thought he should have won Depoy that year. I really do. I think he would finish top 3, but I forget who got it. I don't know if it was like Jaren Jackson who got it that year, or maybe Marcus Smart, maybe. But to me, that was the year Bam should have won it. He's not going to win it this year. And the unfortunate thing for Bam is, as long as Wembanyama's in the league, now that he's kind of established himself as such a dominant force, he's probably going to win like every Defensive Player of the Year award until voters get tired of voting for him because he's just so unique and his rim protection is so incredible. But yeah, I think it would be somewhat sad if Bam finishes his NBA career without a Defensive Player of the Year award, because I think he's that caliber of defender. And I asked him that, like, is that going to, obviously he has a long way to go, but has he thought about that possibility? Because in the past, he's been so like outspoken about how much winning that award would mean to him. And he said, I'm past that. Like, I just want to win games. My peers respect me, and that's what matters most. Like, if I win a championship and I make 10 All-Star games and I'm on 10 all-defensive teams, I'll take that. It's a Hall of Fame career, and I'm good with that. He's like, and he actually, this shows you how much he's thought of it. He goes, Tim Duncan made 15 all-defensive teams and never won Defensive Player of the Year. And he's like, and that's true. I looked up, like, he's right. That Tim Duncan made 15 all-defensive teams and he never won Defensive Player of the Year. That could end up being what Bam is, right? And that's okay.
I think it's the offensive equivalent of somebody who pours in 25, 30 points a game, and he's shooting mid-range jumpers, and he's coming off that pick, and he's hitting that mid-range jumper consistently. He's not 3-point. He's not Steph bombing it from 35 feet. He's not taking it to the hole and dunking over 15 people. He's just consistently filling it up, and it's not quote unquote sexy. Okay, put it this way. You remember the bubble, right? And you remember when they played Boston and they preserved that win because he got the edge of his fingertip on that last second dunk. Everybody was like, what a great defender he is. Now, if you're watching the Heat all the time, you're like, Dan does stuff like this all the time. But because it was that block and in that place, it was amazing. Yeah. But the switching on everybody 1 through 5 and causing someone to shoot maybe 42% instead of 50% goes unnoticed. You're right. They want the steal. They want 4 steals. They want the blocks. They want back-to-back blocks. They want, Wemby coming out of nowhere to all of a sudden switch off his guy and block somebody 10 feet away. That's what they want. But that doesn't negate the consistency that he gives. So that's kind of a real shame. Yeah. But at the very least, this man deserves to be a first team consistently. And that they didn't put him on the first or second team last year seemed like a real travesty.
Yeah. And look, I'm a voter usually for the postseason awards, so I know how it works. And look, I'm covering the Heat pretty much every day. Right. I can't watch every game. So sometimes voters rely on, this guy averaged 4 blocks a game. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong, but that's the reality of it. And that's why Bam has an argument, I think, with what he's saying. The way his impact on defensive end is more subtle than most.
Yes.
But if you watch it every game, night in and night out, you can't miss it. You just can't miss it. And yes, Erik Spoelstra has a big impact in the fact that they've been a top 10 defense 9 of the last 10 years. They're going to be a top 5 defense probably this year. But Bam is the biggest reason behind that, just the stabilizing force. He's been a part of 19 different starting lineups. There have been a lot of injuries, a lot of guys in and out, a lot of inconsistent play. But the thing you can rely on most nights is they're going to be really good on defense. And Bam is the driving force behind that.
So for all those people who, when we get to trade deadlines and like, if you have to trade Bam, then go ahead and do it. I think that's one of those things that get lost in the shuffle. Yeah. Let's say they had pulled that trigger for somebody. Okay, then all of a sudden your defensive anchor is missing. And you're scoring 3-4 more points a game, but you're giving up 6. What's your net gain? And I think, when they're looking at all those metrics, they're trying to figure out what the net gain is.
Yeah. Yeah, you look at all the advanced metrics for defense, and Bam is pretty much in the top 10, So that kind of tells you everything you need to know right there.
Okay, so we talked Bam. We talked playoff scenario. Tomorrow night, playing those Nets again, who've lost 9 in a row. They won 15 games in a row. Looking at the schedule for the next week, at what point do you think we say you guys need to be in 6th because the schedule tightens up a little bit here and you don't want to fall behind? Or are we there now?
I mean, I think you're at that point. You have 20 games left. They need to get this. They need to win every game they can. They can't afford slip-ups. Obviously, Charlotte in the second half of back-to-back at Charlotte won't be easy, but Charlotte's right there. You can't lose that game. So I think that Charlotte game is going to be really big. If they can get that one, I think it'll go a long way in at least distancing, solidifying themselves in at least 8 and not falling further down.
Right.
Because then you have Detroit at home on Sunday, which we've said they're the best. They've been the best team in the East this season. So that's going to be a tough one. So first of all, they got to take care of business against Brooklyn. And then if they could somehow split Charlotte and Detroit and go 2-1 the rest of the week and end up 3-1 this week when you count Tuesday's win over Brooklyn, I think that's a good week. And it sets yourself up, continue to stay in that race for 6. But losing to Brooklyn, God forbid, that would be a disaster for them. They just can't let that happen. Or losing both to Charlotte and Detroit, that would make this a bad week for the Heat.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let's try and commit here for week by week.
Yeah.
Let's see where we stand. Let's see where we stand a week from now. I think we're committed to saying losing to Brooklyn is a disaster. Yes, you can win the other 2, but just the concept of you have to catch everything you can right now and win everything you can and I think we've seen it. We saw them beat the Rockets. Hey, what a great surprise. That's good. Keep that in the bag, but this is not the time where you can have any more Utah Jazz slip-ups all the way through.
No.
If you want to get out of that play-in, you can't afford to drop it.
No, there's no. You really, and Bam said it after Tuesday's win against Brooklyn. Like, we can't afford any more slip-ups. We've already had enough. Like, at this point of the season, they can't.
And Bam's getting a little feisty as of late. So
he is.
I kind of like to see it.
I had the privilege of speaking to him after that loss in Philly. I was the only reporter traveling for that game, and that might have been the most angry I've seen Bam after a loss in his entire career.
Good.
You don't see Bam curse much. He cursed.
But a guy like that, when he loses it, it gets their attention. So good.
Yeah.
He's a captain. That's what he's supposed to do.
And that's one thing I've noticed this year, and I know we got to end the episode, but one thing I've noticed is he's talked about how he doesn't really enjoy being captain and having that responsibility, that it's hard for him. I've seen him kind of step into that role even more this year and kind of become more comfortable and find his voice. So I think that's encouraging. Moments like that after a bad loss in Philly, where you kind of needed that win, him to speak up and kind of say, I'm tired of this, like, to kind of put a voice to it and the frustration, I think that was important. Like you said, I think that caught everybody's attention.
Well, here's hoping he doesn't have to use that voice for the next week until we come back again and we go, oh, sunshine and rainbows, there are puppies and all that good stuff. They had gone 3-0. And look, now we're knocking on the door at 6. But we'll find out. That's why they play these games, right? But if you want to find out what's going on with all things Heat, stay locked in with Anthony Chang here on, you can check X, you can check MiamiHerald.com. Of course, you can check this podcast, and we will have more coming through. And until next time, for Anthony Chang, I'm John Devine. Thanks for staying here with us.